Okay, in today's video we're going to be looking at the concepts of abstract thought, creativity, and empathy. Considering yourself as a vessel for universal introspection is about as philosophically abstract and creative as it gets. And my theory is that the more one embraces this sense of oneness and interdependent connection with all of life, the more easily one can arrive at mental health and well-being, and feel empowered with creativity, and hold greater empathy towards others. First, let's examine the utility of emotions and the futility of ignoring your emotions. Now, many studies have shown that cognition and emotion are very deeply linked. Let's look at some research from Antonio Damasio, particularly his studies on the patient named Elliot. These studies reveal that damage to the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, which is closely linked to the amygdala, very much impaired emotional processing. Despite retaining high-level cognitive abilities, like memory and logical reasoning, he couldn't prioritize options or even make simple decisions, like scheduling an appointment or deciding what to eat. Apparently, emotions are deeply linked to decision-making, and this also plays into speaking as well. It seems the majority of our speech and our thinking is preceded by emotions, and this would make sense as the majority of organisms seem to be running on emotions primarily. And then we attach symbolic representations to those emotions to understand reality and act within that agent-arena relationship. The amygdala seems to attach emotional value to options, allowing us to weigh them meaningfully. Without this emotional input, every option can start to seem valid, leaving us feeling stuck. Now, the ventromedial prefrontal cortex also seems to manage social awareness and empathy towards strangers, and another term you may be familiar with, theory of mind. This is how we come to understand and predict what other people are thinking. And as we've explored in other videos, this capacity is not only bound to humans. Functional MRI scans show that the amygdala and the ventromedial prefrontal cortex are active in healthy individuals when they're considering emotional risks and rewards in decisions. That being said, damage to the amygdala and the VMPFC don't necessarily result in restrictions in decision making. Now I want to take a minute just to explore this point. A lot of times, neurological studies, when applied to psychology and behavior, can be very misleading. We can see a case where somebody commits a sociopathic crime, and we do an MRI scan and we find out that they have a shrunken ventromedial prefrontal cortex, and we assume that's the sole cause of the issue, and often that there's nothing that can be done about it. And we also tend to assume that this must be the case for those we identify as narcissistic or narcissistic personality disorder, NPD, that they have NPD because of regions in the brain that were underdeveloped in their youth, and that there's nothing they can do about that either. This involves two major problems. Firstly, the replication crisis, wherein psychology is struggling more than any other scientific field to replicate its studies. And when we do replicate these studies, we often find contradictions. And secondly, the idea of the crystallized identity, which we've discussed at some length in the past, but let's suffice to say that in the individualistic West, we very much tend to assume that our identities must remain fixed and rigid and permanent throughout time. And that's just not how brains work either. That's not how personalities work or brains. Neuroplasticity does exist. This is a crucial function of the brain. Brain regions can grow and become enhanced with various meditative and introspective practices and therapy. I digress. In many of these cases, decisions just seem to lack personal relevance. There's no internal signaling indicating which decision feels better or worse. Choices can become paralyzed by rational analysis. We end up overanalyzing things without an emotional push to decide one option over another. And I try to avoid using pop psychology terms like decision paralysis for a couple reasons. For one thing, you're not literally paralyzed. You can make decisions, unless you indeed have a condition like Elliot. Using these terms is a bit offensive to people who are actually paralyzed. It's a bit insensitive and invalidating and a little ableist in my opinion. Both existential psychotherapy and CBT seem to encourage patients to think in terms of temporary experiences instead of rigid, fixed experiences. We could call these decision immobilization experiences or effort-based decisions. But whatever the term is that you want to use, it's important to remember that decisions always require metabolic energy. It's how we suspend cognitive dissonance and challenge our biases. That's how we arrive at the best decisions, by applying the most nuance and patience to our choices. For example, it's hard to predict how you're going to feel after getting a certain college degree, so emotions don't really factor in that much here anyways. Let's take a moment to examine how creativity involves abstraction and extrapolation versus narrowed, focused attention and zooming in. The etymology of the word is useful here. It means to find the center of a cone, to concentrate. We zoom in on the individual pieces, the chess piece or the puzzle piece, and remind ourselves of all of its properties. The puzzle piece may have a weird shape or unique coloring, which narrows down the possibilities of what we can do with it and where it can go. But in order to use both pieces, one must zoom out to the big circle of the cone to find all the properties of the arena that it occupies. In the human world, this is the agent-arena relationship that John Vervaeke talks about. Different arenas present different possibilities for each individual piece, just like different situations present different modes of operation for the human individual. Alright, now let's make this arena as abstract as possible. You are a vessel for universal introspection. You are the universe quite literally coming alive and trying to understand itself throughout all of life's complexities. You are a being with the ability to adapt to many complex situations, learn new perspectives, and make adjustments to live under new, better paradigms. Now, in the postmodern West, we are very much challenged by context, it seems. The primary zeitgeist, or cultural paradigm that we operate under, is very individualistic in nature. When we adopt terminology like social anxiety disorder, it can unconsciously limit our confidence in adapting to these complex social situations. But adapting to these situations is key for living a fulfilled life of connection, and for adopting this mission of universal introspection. Alright, so let's look at creativity for a bit. Now, as this general problem solver, you have this ability to abstract upon reality and narrow in on the details in the way that you want to express yourself creatively as well. When making a painting, you have to zoom out to observe the entire image that you're trying to portray, and zoom out even farther to the perception of reality that you're trying to convey with the overall image. And then zoom in to add details with your drawing apparatus, like shading and clear lines and other graphic elements. When writing a song, you have to zoom out to capture the overall message that you want to portray in the song lyrically, and the overarching structure and the harmonies involved in the entire piece. I like to think that you can tell an entire story with just a guitar alone. You have to zoom into the particular when choosing certain words in your lyrics, and when writing a guitar solo, when making choices in the construction of a melody, when choosing which unique sounds to incorporate when writing an EDM song, and where to place certain drum elements. And when doing cable management as an engineer, you have to zoom out to the entire arrangement of the cable positions, and zoom into the details on how you connect them, and the quality of the cable installation, and so on and so forth. This ability to think creatively by using abstractive extrapolation and detailed concentration is one of our most valuable skills as a human, and this has huge application when it comes to mental health. For example, when we go to explain a particular behavior as being due to our autism, or our social anxiety disorder, or bipolar disorder, we may be missing the bigger picture. We may be overlooking the context and prioritizing symptoms over the causes. We might end up over-prioritizing the idea that we're acting based on defense mechanisms that we learned in our childhood upbringing, and neglect the bigger picture that involves the agent in the arena. We want to form this participatory knowledge that's needed to fully integrate with our society and participate in various complex social situations. The bigger picture message seems to be that we always want to be in this growth mindset and question our thoughts, not just become cast about by whatever enters our minds. But doing this requires particularized mindfulness. We have to continuously zoom out to keep that abstract conception of growth open, while consistently zooming in to catch these particular instances, these very unique and subjective experiences, in order to make the right decisions in each particular instance. Now, we've explored what I call deterministic empathy in other episodes, but let's see how this might apply to a universe coming to realize itself and live in this human form. All these other vessels for universal introspection are coming to understand themselves and behave based on this causal chain of occurrences that created them, such as evolution, their childhood upbringing, and all of the factors involved in the ecological system. They're mostly running on limbic system processing, reacting to life instead of contemplating deeply. At least this is the case in the West. As most psychologists will tell you, people are mostly running around 95% of the time on autopilot. This is called determinism. The idea is that the person that you are and the actions that you take are all determined by your past experiences and your genetic predispositions. That is, until you are taught introspection and self-awareness and these mindfulness practices. Because we can never know for sure whether or not someone has been taught to develop those capacities, we can never assume that anyone is actually deliberately choosing to do anything. The more determinism that we attribute to a person's existence and actions, the more we can hold empathy and compassion towards them, hence deterministic empathy. Now, ideally, we'd rather not rely on this way of thinking about people, viewing them as causally influenced meat machines. We'd rather be running in a constant state of peaceful non-judgment, equanimity, loving kindness, and unconditional positive regard. But this isn't always the easiest state of mind to achieve emotionally, so thinking through the lens of determinism can kind of help us arrive at this mindset via a more logic-based approach. As we were saying earlier, we want to use our cognition to monitor our emotions, not suppress them, and not ignore them, but form a healthy relationship with them. This is kind of the foundation of the majority of therapies, it seems. And many people attribute logic-based thinking to autism, which is a very gross generalization, but if you find value in thinking that way, this way of thinking can indeed work to your advantage. This deterministic approach can be very useful. Alternatively, you could consider yourself to have a narcissistic personality disorder and never work on developing any sense of compassion or empathy at all. or compersion, this term that's used to describe feeling joy in other people's successes. Now, this word empathy has become very reified in the West. It's defined as the ability to pick up on what others are feeling. And here in the US, due to our highly egocentric and prideful sense of individualism, we often think of empathy in terms of being an empath, as though we're some kind of superpower that other people simply don't have, especially the neurotypicals, and those with narcissistic personality disorder and sociopaths. But of course, this is crucial for developing healthy social awareness. Everyone can form what's called a theory of mind, or the ability to theorize about what's going on in someone else's mind. Even other species can do this, like dogs and dolphins. This is how we form strategies and hold conversations and just generally relate to each other. And possible exceptions to this might be schizophrenia and sociopathy and traumatic brain injuries. These are mentally disordered states that might involve genetic, endogenous predispositions, resulting in a serious struggle to consider other people's emotional and cognitive states. But even in these cases, therapy is highly beneficial and probably that much more important. And indeed, people have reported completely overcoming their schizophrenia. And according to studies, the majority of traumatic brain injuries do heal. Oftentimes, they only involve breaking of axonal connections between about 1,000 to 5,000 neurons in various regions of the brain. All that being said, we have to work with what we've got. We're all cut from the same cloth. We're all versions of the universe trying to understand itself, and we must cooperate in order to achieve this to the best of our abilities. The Buddhist word pratitya samutpada means interdependent origination. We all originated from stardust, which amalgamated into molecular bonds, which formed into cellular networks, which formed into human networks, wherein we all depend on each other to function at our best. It is so obvious that we are far more connected and similar than we are different and separate. Searching for these similarities is how we form medical advances and therapeutic modalities. But arriving at empirical correlations between all the ways that human bodies and brains operate and become ill requires a lot of patience and effort. Forming philosophies about the human condition is critical to both medical science and psychotherapy. Yet the Western conception of the self is so divided and separate and atomistic and nomenologic. We occupy this world of the nameable, the separable, the distinct, and the particular. We are label hungry. We crave absolution and perfect definitions of terms. Yet, in our ignorance, we adopt these terms without fully questioning their meaning and their potential implications. The philosophers and critical thinkers know how to question the etymology of the words we use, without being bewitched by language, as Wittgenstein put it. This is incredibly important to our conceptions of human psychology and the understanding of the self. I'd also like to think that deep contemplation of this role can yield a sense of responsibility to improve the self, and a sense of duty to improve one's community and integrate with it, and a sense of grace and empathy towards those who don't recognize their incredible capacity for growth and their own privilege in occupying this role, and of course a consistent sense of gratitude and thankfulness for the rarity of your own unique experience. As we explore in my video, What Are the Chances?, we learn that the likelihood that you exist in this form, based on these particular parents, in this country, and in this galaxy, is something like 1 in 10 to the 40,000th power chances. Though it may not feel like it at times, you are special, your life is precious, as are all the other lives around you. Take your existence as a blessing for all that it's worth. Go forward and live your best life.